There's a house in rural Ohio where the kitchen floor stays cold in July. Not cool, cold. The kind of cold that makes you stop walking and look down. No air conditioner, no fan running, just a wooden grate in the floor and air coming up through it at 55 degrees Fahrenheit on a day when it was 94 outside. I stood in that kitchen in 2019 and I could not explain what I was feeling. Then the owner walked me outside, pointed at a capped pipe sticking 4 feet out of the lawn and said, "That's all it is." $300 in materials, buried once, running for 50 years without a single utility bill for cooling. That is what this video is about. Before we go any further, I want you to understand something. The average American homeowner will spend somewhere between $70,000 and $140,000 on air conditioning over the life of a house. That includes the units, the service calls, the refrigerant, and the eventual replacements. You will spend that money whether the system works well or not. You will spend it in good years and bad years, and at the end of it, you will have nothing to show for it. No equity, no asset, nothing to pass on. What I am about to show you costs $300 and lasts longer than the house itself. There are no moving parts to replace, there's no refrigerant to refill, there's no service contract, and the reason you have never heard of it has less to do with science and more to do with who profits when you remain dependent. Here's the principle, and once you hear it, you will not be able to unhear it. 6 feet below the surface of the ground in almost every state in the continental United States, the soil temperature holds steady between 50 and 58 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. It does not change in August. It does not change in February. The Department of Agriculture has documented this since the 1940s, and the data has not shifted. The reason is thermal mass. Packed soil is extraordinarily dense, and to change its temperature by even a single degree requires enormous energy. When the summer sun hammers your roof for 8 weeks straight, that heat takes 6 to 8 weeks just to travel 6 feet down through the earth. By the time it gets there, the surface has already cooled again. The ground never catches up. It stays at 55 degrees forever. Traditional farming communities across the American Midwest figured this out long before modern engineering did. Not from textbooks, but from root cellars. They watched vegetables stay crisp through heat waves in simple holes dug into hillsides. And at some point, someone asked the obvious question. If the ground holds 55 degrees, why are we running ice boxes in the house 10 feet away? So instead of a hole for storing cabbages, they ran a pipe. Hot air goes in one end, cool air comes out the other. That is the entire mechanism. No compressor, no electricity, just a buried tube and the natural temperature of the earth. The installation itself is simpler than most people imagine. You dig a trench starting at least 40 feet from the house, ideally on the north side, where the ground stays shaded longest. The trench runs 6 feet deep. 8 feet is better in southern states. At the far end of the trench, you install a vertical intake riser, just a capped pipe that sticks 4 feet above the ground with a stainless mesh screen over the top to keep insects and rodents out. This is Hidden Fix Lab. We do not sell products. We recover what was buried. Drop a comment and tell me, clay soil or sandy soil and what state you're in. That one detail tells me exactly which installation variation applies to your property, and it shapes the next video directly. The men who built this country did not need a service contract to stay comfortable. Neither do you. The material list is short. You need smooth wall 4-inch PVC pipe. Not corrugated, because corrugated ridges trap moisture and grow mold. You need 2 90-degree elbows, a screened intake cap, a floor register, and pipe sealant. At any farm supply or plumbing supply store, the total comes to around $208 to $300 for a system serving a 1,200 to 500 square foot home. That is the full investment. The labor is 2 weekends. First weekend you dig, second weekend you assemble, seal, and backfill. And here is something that almost no modern guide mentions. The backfill is where most people lose 40% of their system's performance without realizing it. A technical study from 1979, conducted at a facility in Kansas in partnership with Kansas State University, measured 7 residential installations and found that loose, dry backfill, the kind most people just shovel back in, created air pockets around the pipe that insulated it from the surrounding earth. Those pockets cut cooling output by up to 40%. The installations that performed best were backfilled in 6-inch layers, with each layer lightly wetted and tamped before the next was added. Clay-rich soil compacted against the pipe with moisture in it conducted heat out of the passing air dramatically better than loose fill. That study was submitted to the main American Engineering Handbook body in February of 1980. It was rejected in May of 1980. The stated reason was, and I am paraphrasing the archived committee language, that the findings were considered inconsistent with established residential mechanical practice. Not inconsistent with physics, not inconsistent with the data, inconsistent with the practice of selling people central air conditioning. That study was never cited again in any mainstream residential building guide, but the farms where those systems were installed are still running them today. So here is the practical takeaway, written simply. When you backfill your earth tube trench, do it in 6-inch lifts. Add roughly 1 gallon of water for every 10 feet of pipe per layer. Tamp each layer with a hand tamper or the back of a shovel before adding the next. It takes 20 extra minutes. It is the difference between a pipe that barely takes the edge off and a system that replaces your entire cooling bill. Now, before you grab a shovel, there are 3 real limitations you need to know because Hidden Fix Lab does not sell you half the picture. First, if you live in a climate where the average ground temperature at 10 feet depth exceeds 68 degrees, most of South Florida, the Texas Gulf Coast, coastal Louisiana, this system will cool your air, but not enough to carry the whole load on the most brutal days. You would need supplemental dehumidification. Second, if your water table sits above 6 feet for most of the year, you need to incorporate a gravel drainage sleeve around the pipe, fist-sized river rock packed 12 inches thick around the full length of the run. So groundwater does not back up into the system. It adds roughly $80 to the material cost, and it completely solves the problem. Third, if you have bedrock within 4 feet of your surface, parts of New England, the Ozarks, the Appalachian Ridges, trenching becomes expensive fast, and this approach may not be cost-effective. For everyone else, and based on USGS soil survey data, that is roughly 78% of the continental United States, the conditions are favorable. The entire grain belt, the Mid-Atlantic, most of the Pacific Northwest, the southern Great Lakes, the upland South, we are talking about land that supports somewhere around 240 million people who have never once heard this option discussed by any contractor they have ever hired. That is not an accident. The residential cooling industry in the United States is worth $29 billion per year. A single homeowner over 30 years of air conditioning represents over $15,000 in lifetime revenue. Unit purchase, service calls, refrigerant, replacement. An earth tube installed once for $300 converts that customer into someone who never calls again. You can do the math on what that means for an industry with billions of dollars in annual revenue and every incentive to keep simpler, older solutions out of the contractor licensing courses, out of the building codes, and out of your hands. But here is what they cannot bury: physics. The ground temperature does not change because a trade group votes on it. The principle works, whether it appears in a handbook or not. It has been working in farmhouse basements and root cellar cooling systems across this country for longer than modern refrigerants have existed. The knowledge did not disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked too well, too cheaply, and with no ongoing revenue attached. You are sitting on a 55-degree thermal battery right now, 6 feet below your lawn. It has been there your entire life. The intake pipe, the 40-foot trench, the wet clay pack around the PVC, that is the sum total of what stands between you and free cooling for the rest of your life in this house and every house after it. This is Hidden Fix Lab. We do not sell products. We recover what was buried. Drop a comment and tell me clay soil or sandy soil and what state you're in. That one detail tells me exactly which installation variation applies to your property, and it shapes the next video directly. The men who built this country did not need a service contract to stay comfortable. Neither do you.